Welcome to another edition of Life, Love, and Philosophy. My special guest today is Anna Tomasino. Anna is an educator and an author. She has been teaching at the City University of New York for approximately 10 years. Indeed, is presently teaching at the College of Staten Island and is also the author of several books. And recently initiated her own program on CTV. Anna, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be back again. And after we did our last show, as I've mentioned to you, I was stopped by 3 or 4 people telling me they watched the show and they enjoyed it. And in fact, I just have to say this so your audience can just get a little chuckle. Somebody stopped me and said to me, "Oh, you were on with the philosophy guy, and he's interviewed Hillary Clinton." So it was just fantastic because they were like, "Oh, so impressed," and I'm so honored.
I hope
to
you
be
didn't
here.
tell him. Hope you did not tell him that I didn't interview.
No, I left it all, and I
Okay.
said, "Yes, I
Thank you.
was. Thank you."
That'll help my reputation. Okay. Maybe
so
Hillary is watching.
And
now.
yeah, she's welcome, I'm sure.
And if she is, her promotion guy can contact me. And also, by the way, we'll interview John McCain or some Republican as well.
Oh, of course, we have to be fair.
Yeah, we want to be fair. Now, I mentioned at the outset that you have your own program on CTV now. Please tell the viewers a little bit about it and when it's on.
Oh, sure. Well, it's called Writing for Everyday Living, and the whole goal is to provide practical tips for writing that people can use in their everyday life. So we did a 3-part series on letter writing, a really fun show called How to Write a Recipe. And then we're also going to do how to write a toast or a speech, how to do a resume. So I just want people to not be so afraid to write and to give them skills that they could do right now at home to brush up on their writing.
I saw 2 of your segments, probably the first 2 that you did. I enjoyed them and found them helpful because, of course, I write regularly. I have to write my script every week.
Definitely.
I also teach in Manhattan, and I have to write my lesson plan and lecture plans, and so much of what you said I found relevant to what I do. So often in writing, the most difficult part is getting started, and
Absolutely.
I think you mentioned that. And the other thing I have found is that I don't always know when I sit down to write my lecture where it's going. And I think you mentioned that one of the nice things about writing is it helps you to clarify your thoughts and organize your thoughts so that people should not be apprehensive if they don't know where it's going when they begin the writing project.
No, you're absolutely right. And I find, too, a lot of people think, okay, I have to sit down now and think about what I want to write and then write. But I try to reiterate in my programs that, like, as the one program that you saw, it's a process. You think as you write, and then as you write, you think. And even if you don't know what to start, it becomes illuminated as you go through.
Sure.
So I'm sure for you, sometimes you sit down to write your lecture, you start with one idea, and next thing you know, you may have a different frame of thought or a different lecture.
Sure.
And then you put aside that other lecture maybe for another time.
Sure. One other thing I was reminded about in listening to you is that so often people don't realize that when they write, it doesn't have to be a letter, it doesn't have to be for publication.
Absolutely.
That we can just write to help us think more clearly. So many of the great writers have talked about that. Like St. Augustine said that as he writes, he progresses, and as he progresses, he writes. So many of the great writers, as you know, kept journals. Thoreau, probably my favorite writer, kept a journal. In fact, his journal consists of more than 1 million words. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was kind of Thoreau's mentor, kept a journal. Tolstoy kept a journal. And my guess is people in the contemporary world are less likely to keep journals than people were who lived before the television era, for example. But again, it's a reminder to people, especially the young people who may be watching, that they might want to keep a journal, or some people would call it a diary.
Or a diary. Doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you're writing.
And that the value of it, to me, is that it helps you to clarify your thoughts and also gives your life some perspective. You can go back and look at what you wrote 2 months ago or a year ago or whatever, and might help you even to live a better life because you're thinking more clearly.
No, I agree with you. And also recently you did a program on Marcus Aurelius.
Yes.
With his meditations.
Yeah.
He wrote them down, for himself.
It's a good example, yeah.
And when I was watching your program, I remember thinking, wow, this ties in perfectly with my show. And I also think sometimes, you're right, I did one show, we talked about how if you write down in your journal before you go to bed, you might even have a better sleep because you get what's bothering you on the page.
I very much
And
believe
I don't know
that.
about you, but sometimes I don't know what's bothering me. Do you know what I mean? Like
Precisely,
might be
precisely.
I'm not be feeling well, or something is nagging at me, and I don't know what it is. But when I'm writing it, I could say, wow, that's what's bothering me.
Yeah, writing can be very therapeutic. And I hope that English teachers succeed in conveying this idea to young people and professors who teach English also. Because I think if young people can begin to see that writing can be therapeutic, you don't need to make money from your writing. You don't even need to write letters, as I said before.
Definitely.
That it can be therapeutic, that can be the hook that will get young kids to write. I first discovered this when I was about 14 or 15, that I was fortunate. I had very good English teachers in high school, and we had to write every week, had to write at least a composition every week, sometimes a book report. And what I discovered at around the age of 14 or 15 is that it was therapeutic. I felt good
You felt
after I completed. It was difficult getting started, I must say
Right.
that. Getting started was difficult. But once I got into it, I felt good about
Well,
it.
I find I begin almost every single class of mine with the free write.
Yeah.
My students do a 2 or 3 minute free write, and what I give them is a quote, and it's not necessarily related to English. It could be, you know, something from philosophy. And usually I get them to write, and what I find is they come in and they have their books and they're all busy. Then they sit down and they start writing, and they sort of get calm. And then what happens is I always try to pick something connected to the text we're discussing, and then they, you know, immediately there's something to talk about.
Sure.
And I'll say, well, how does this quote relate to the reading we're looking at today? And they'll say, well, this is just like this idea.
Yeah.
And it brings up a whole discussion.
I think the other important thing is this, that if young people get very interested in writing, that can help facilitate their efforts at getting interested in reading.
Yes.
Because I remember when I was in elementary school, I told my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Snyder, that I thought I wanted to be a writer. And sports writer, by the way, sports writer. And she said, well, she said, the best way to prepare, she said, besides writing, is to read good sports writing. So she said, you know what you should do, Philip, and I was about 11 years old, she said, you should buy the New York Times every day and read their sports writers. And she said, if you read their sports writers regularly, that will help you to write sports better. And I did. And I went on to college, and when I went to university, I wrote the sports column
Oh,
for
how
the,
wonderful.
for the
Wow.
university newspaper.
That's
Because I was even
unbelievable.
in college interested in becoming a sports writer. But I thank all those New York Times sports writers whom I had read
Right,
for many
because-
years by the time I got to college, because they helped me in terms of vocabulary, sentence structure, how to hook people in the article, etc.
And you do the same now with your show and in the lectures and everything.
Thank you.
And I try to tell people, too, it doesn't matter what you're writing, or even really so much like what you're reading. It's the fact that you're reading, as long as it's good writing that you're reading.
Yeah.
And, you know, it doesn't matter what the topic is.
Yeah.
You know, because if you're reading philosophy or sports, it could relate, they're intertwined. Because a lot of sports psychology is based on these ideas of philosophy, you know.
Well said.
There's that interconnection.
Sure. I want to go back to something you said before. I'm so happy you mentioned Marcus Aurelius. I recently completed a 2-part series on him, and it is interesting and important that you picked up on the idea that his most famous book is called The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, and yes, it was originally his journal. He did not write it for publication. In fact, the original title that he gave it was To Myself. To Myself was the original title. And I mentioned
wonderful.
in my program, and again, another reason I'm so happy you mentioned it, that this book, again, it's called The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. In my opinion, it's the best self-help book ever written by a philosopher. And I've read, you know, many of the philosophers. I've read many of their books. Some are more difficult to read than others. Marcus Aurelius is pretty easy to read, and I think he's right on target in talking about so many aspects of living. So again, if people miss those segments,
it's wonderful.
that I suggest you buy the book, The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius.
Definitely, and the reason why I didn't miss your segment is because it's on my DVR, your show, so I tape it, so I was
you.
able to catch it. Also, the other thing is, I heard that when they interviewed President Clinton,
Yeah.
this is Bill, not Hillary now,
Yes.
and he said that he had a copy of that book.
Yes, yes.
And he talked about it. So when I saw your show, I was like, wow, this is so fantastic that you did a
Maureen
two
Dowd,
parts.
columnist for the New York Times, did a column once on Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, she did?
Yeah, she
Oh.
likes him also, and she took quotes from the book, maybe 4 or 5 quotes, and put those quotes in her column. And she mentioned at the top of the column that Bill Clinton claims that he rereads Marcus Aurelius every year. And,
Oh, every year. Okay,
yeah,
so I heard
yeah.
that he read, has a copy.
Yeah,
So
yeah. What I would like to do now is to move to a discussion of some of your books. I'm familiar with two of the books you have written. One is entitled Music Culture. The other is entitled Discovering Popular Culture. Could you tell us a little bit about the books you've written?
Sure.
And what they deal with and how you got interested in the topics?
Oh, sure. Well, let me just start from the beginning. This is how it all began. So I believe, this is why I love your program, that people should read a lot and think about and start keeping collections of their favorite, writers, and like you have your philosophers, the different quotes. As a teacher, I noticed I used all different essays in my classes, and I said, I'm going to put together a book for myself, just for me to use for my classes. And I didn't think about publication. So I had a little packet of essays that I really liked that I started putting together.
Yeah.
And then it ended up, I was approached by a publisher, and this was my first book, Essay 33.
Uh-huh.
And I enjoyed, putting this book together.
There are 33 essays in it?
33 essays,
Okay, yeah.
nonfiction reflections on the self and society. And what I did was I picked...
Can people still buy this book, by
Yes,
the way?
in fact, it's going to its third printing.
Okay, Essay 33, Anna Tomasino. Will Barnes & Noble have it?
I don't know if they could buy it on Amazon.
Amazon, okay, Amazon.
They could. So when I really enjoyed the process, and this ties into what you were just saying, write something for yourself. I compiled material for my students because I care about them and I wanted them to learn. Then what happened was Longman saw this book, and they came to me, and I wrote Music and Culture and then Discovering Popular Culture. And I'll tell you why I decided these topics. I decided with music and culture because I wanted to grab the students' attention. And I know you and I have been talking and everything about teaching. And once you have students' attention, the magic can happen in the classroom. So what I wanted to do was examine issues in society and get students to think about it in a way that they can relate to. And almost everything you can find in music, all the different issues.
Sure.
And then for popular culture, I had so much fun with the music. I decided to cast a wider net and embrace television, radio, advertising.
Yeah.
And so that's what I want. I want people to think about
And this goes so well
society.
with the writing. If one wants to get young people interested in writing, it is true most young people are interested in music. Most young people, for better or worse, are interested in television, the internet, etc.
Oh,
and,
definitely.
this is a good hook to get them interested in writing.
And also to make them feel empowered, Phil, because they are intelligent. I work with students every day, and they are so smart, and what they need is self-esteem.
Yeah.
They need to believe that they have a point of view and that it's vital and it needs to get across.
I like that a lot. Yeah, many people, I'm so happy you mentioned that, many people, I think, don't have confidence in their own thinking.
Yes.
One of the themes of my programs, and I get emails on this, some critical, by the way, is I point out repeatedly that there is a consensus among the great thinkers that we cannot trust the way the majority thinks, that the majority is often wrong. Even thinkers who greatly believed in democracy have said this. Winston Churchill was a great proponent of democracy, but even he believed the majority is usually wrong. Now you might wonder, how did he reconcile that with democracy? Well, he said this: democracy doesn't seem to be a very good kind of government when you realize the majority is often wrong. But then he said this: when you compare democracy to the alternatives,
others,
it looks terrific.
Right, exactly.
I believe that because I got some emails from people asking me, do I believe in democracy? Yes, I very much do believe in democracy. Again, for the same reason Churchill does, that when you look at the alternatives, democracy looks very good. But the point is that people should develop confidence in their own thinking and in the conclusions they've come to about themselves and life. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't listen to other people and read other points of view. They should. That's essential. One of the things I do in my own life, every day I try to read political columnists whose opinions differ from mine, because I want to test my own opinions. Maybe they're right. I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to be afraid to read people who have a different viewpoint. Because if they're right, then they'll free me from my illusions. If they're wrong, well, it'll give me even more confidence about what I believe. So I'm not suggesting that people, should not expose themselves to viewpoints other than their own. That's a must in life. We must all do that to think more clearly. But again, the point I'm making is we cannot let other people do the thinking for us. We must think for ourselves.
You're absolutely right, and I think you've just touched on two key solutions that people can do right now in their life to become more savvy about the media. First of all, you touched on this fact about being aware and thinking for themselves. Once you realize that whatever you're watching is from a perspective and a point of view, and you're aware of it, then you know, okay, you could start thinking about what you think, because that's not the be-all truth. The
Sure.
other solution, which is fantastic that you just mentioned, is reading the opposing point of view. That is such a great way for people to become empowered.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people think, oh, I don't want to read that, I don't believe that. No, you read it so that you can strengthen your position.
Precisely.
So I think what you just said is the crux and a true path to realizing, you know, the inaccuracies in the media around us.
Yeah.
I mean, if people just, one, they become aware that there's always a point of view and that they need to think for themselves. And the second thing is, you know, to really sit back and say, you know what, I'm going to take the time to read the opposing point of view, just like you do.
Sure. Well, one of the things I've tried to teach young people over the years is that when people argue, whether one is arguing with me or you're seeing people argue on television, that the purpose of arguing, in my view, and in the view of the great thinkers, is not to win. If I'm arguing with you about politics, let's assume, and I don't know what your politics are, and I don't care really. I don't mean that. I don't mean that. Yeah, but let's assume we disagree. If we were arguing, and I hope we can do it in a civil way, I like to think that my purpose in arguing with you is not an ego trip, not to prove myself right, but to find out the truth.
Exactly.
And I like to think that if we're arguing and I discover that you have the truth, that I don't, I would say, Anna, thank you for freeing me from the illusions I had, from the false. In fact, Ralph Waldo Emerson said this. Emerson is one of my favorite essayists. And he said, he talked about teaching elementary school. Well, actually, he was talking about teaching below the college level. It wasn't just elementary school. But he said this. He said, it would be nice, he said, that if a student proved the teacher wrong about something in class, he said what the teacher should do, first of all, is have the students applaud that other student who proved the teacher wrong, and then the teacher should go over and hug that student and tell the student, thank you for setting me right. And what Emerson is saying, in effect, is, again, when we argue, when we dispute, it should not be an ego trip where we have to be right. That's a very immature way of arguing. The purpose of arguing is to find out the truth. And if the other person has more of the truth than I do, then again, we should shake hands and say, I thank you. You know, I thank you for the truth shall free us.
I'm so happy that you mentioned this, because as a teacher, I find one of the hardest things for me to get students to become accustomed to is that academics like to argue.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that we don't like each other. It doesn't mean that we're not going to go have coffee or dinner together. It just means we like to argue about ideas. And it doesn't become this physical fight. It doesn't become this, you know, oh, he's right, I'm wrong, so I feel badly now. No, it's just part of the culture of thinking.
One of the things I almost refuse to do, sometimes I will do it, but I will rarely watch network TV where a liberal and a conservative are arguing with each other, because it gets so heated, it's not civil, and I've never seen either a liberal or a conservative, you know, shake the other guy's hand or the woman's hand and say, you know, I think you're right. And it would seem to me, if it's a legitimate dispute, that would occasionally happen. Occasionally happen, saying, you know, your arguments are better than mine, and I want to concede that.
And they very rarely say, well, you're right on that point.
Yeah.
Even if you don't agree with the whole thing, you know, sometimes a certain point is accurate.
Sure.
You know, so I think, did you find that with people too, trying to get them to to learn that aspect with students, that academics like to argue or about this intellectual
Well, one of the things I did, especially many years ago when I taught high school, I told the kids that it seemed to me that there are certain expressions that one should habitually use in disputing, arguing with other people. And among those expressions are, it seems to me, I believe, I think. In other words, avoid dogmatism. If I am arguing with you, Anna, and I say, you're wrong. Well, you're going to get angry at me. You may not show the anger, but you will. You know, people don't like people respond, you're wrong. But if I were to say to you, it seems to me, and then give a different viewpoint from yours, well, you could accept that, you know, I'm arguing in a civil way.
You're not saying I'm wrong, like the whole essence of me is wrong.
Exactly. So I think it's very important for people to learn how to argue. Benjamin Franklin, in his autobiography, talked about this. Franklin said that he generally never was so bold as to directly deny what his adversary was saying in argument. Would always avoid saying, you're wrong, or,
Right.
some expression like that. But instead, Franklin says, he would use expressions like, I think, I believe.
I think.
That those are softer expressions.
Right.
Helps the argument to go on.
Or you could say, if you look at it from this perspective
Sure.
and everything. And I love what you said before about, like, with the opposing point of view when you're arguing, to try to put yourself in the other person's perspective.
Ah, excellent, excellent.
And I always think of To Kill a Mockingbird, the character Atticus Finch, when he says, you never really know what a person's been through, something like that, till you've walked in their shoes.
I agree.
So I think if you think of, okay, if I was this person in their place, how would I feel at that time?
I think that is so important. One of the reasons I think that is so important is I think there are few things in life more important than empathy.
Yes.
That it's very important that we be able to identify with people who may come from a different walk of life than we do, a different environment, maybe even a different culture. One of the real learning experiences for me has been that I've spent a lot of time in Europe during the last 20 years. I've mentioned on my
Right.
program for years. I've lived in Holland in the summertime. I don't know if I'll be there this summer. And the other country
That's
I've
nice.
gone to a lot is Spain. And one of the things I really enjoy about going to Holland, Spain, Germany also I go to a lot. One of the things I really enjoy is talking to people who have been raised in a different culture, who see the world very differently from the way I see it. And we have some great conversations because we share viewpoints, and they often help me to see things I didn't see before. And sometimes I think I help them to see things
Right.
I didn't see. Because their politics, for example, are very different. In Holland, in Germany, and Spain, liberalism is very fashionable. We know in the last 20 years or so in America, conservatism has been in the ascendancy since President Reagan. Well, in Europe, generally speaking, they believe in big government. In Holland, Spain, and Germany, there's universal health care. People pay high taxes, by the way, for this. They believe in big government. In France, for example, there's free nursery care, free daycare if you have
Wow.
children. In Holland and Germany, you pay a nominal fee. In Holland, Germany, and Spain, university is pretty much free.
Wow.
Again, I mentioned people pay higher taxes for this. But again, they believe in this. So
right.
that Ronald Reagan or George Bush would have difficulty, winning almost any kind of election in Europe. By the way, I'm not putting down Reagan
Right.
or
No,
Bush.
you're just making your
they have a
point,
different
which
viewpoint.
is- right.
In fact, one of the things I would very much like to see would be somebody of Reaganomics, so to speak, disputing with a very liberal economist from Europe. I'd love to see it on PBS,
Right,
a
and
conservative
they could
economist and
just-
a liberal economist. The truth probably lies somewhere in between.
Right, so you're right.
Because I don't believe that the liberals are always right. I don't believe the conservatives are always right, by the way, when they're talking economics,
Right,
by
no,
the way.
it's
But it would be interesting. But what I'm saying is that when I go to Europe, I hear a different viewpoint on so many aspects of living, and that stimulates my thinking.
And this is so key, because then people could become informed with the media this way, because if they realize everybody has a different point of reference, because we have different cultural backgrounds, we come from different places, different countries.
Yeah.
You realize this show that you're watching could be written or produced by a person of this point of view. This one, another show from somebody else from a different point of view. So when they're looking at the media, they could stop and say, well, what perspective is this coming from?
Sure.
Not just with the conversations, like you're saying, but also with the media, and then they could become more informed and even proactive, because if you realize there's a certain station that tends to, that you disagree with their point of view, their slant, you think that they leave out a lot of
Yeah.
information, you could be proactive and not watch that particular station, and instead get your informed both points of view from two other credible sources, if
Yeah.
you know one isn't.
Sure.
And I think it's so important, even with reading what you're talking about. You and I could read the same quote and have two different perspectives.
No question
on
about it, of course.
And that's one of the joys of reading and of interacting and having a conversation. And the debate you mentioned is so vital. I wish more people would do it.
Yeah.
And then we would have better conversations instead of just, what is the weather like?
Well said. In fact, I don't know if I did a program on the art of conversation. I may have.
I missed that one. I wish
We're approaching the 100th episode, 100th episode in the series of programs I've done, and I sometimes forget if I've done a program, because I've taught this. I've taught this in some of the places I've taught at, the art of conversation.
The art, right.
And I think in America now we're kind of losing the art of conversation. We don't look at conversation as an art, and we don't realize that conversation can be very therapeutic, and that conversation can enrich our lives, but that also there's some skill in having a good conversation. And I think maybe teachers and professors should spend some time teaching students about what they might all do to have better conversations.
Yes, and then just one more thing before you go. I know we're almost out of
Yes,
time. Again,
yes.
that's why you and I both believe in the human mind and human dignity, and we respect different people. And that's why I love your program, because what we're saying to people is we want to hear what you think.
Precisely.
And
one of the questions I like that George Stern used to raise in a column he wrote in the Advance years ago is, what do you think? And I do that on my program now.
Yeah,
what do you
I think it's so effective when you say that. What do you think?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I must say, George Stern did that regularly in columns he wrote for the Advance years ago.
What do you think?
Little plug for George Stern.
That's,
there.
yes.
You know, we're out of time now. I had seven
So
questions, I think 8, 9 questions. We got to the second one. We're going to do several more programs.
We'll do several more.
And
Thank
we will
you so much.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Ada.
very much.
Thanks a lot. As usual, I would like to end with a quote from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau, in his masterpiece, Walden, penned the following words: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."